like to welcome Steve Brett, who is the Executive Coordinator Major Assessment, which is the area into which this project fits. And I'd like to welcome Hoagie Moscrop Ellison, who is a Senior Planner in that division. I would also like to thank the boss of the guys in the City Planning, Alicia Swain, who is the Director of Economy, Planning and Environment of the City of the Gold Coast, in encouraging her employees to be present here tonight and to indicate to us the seriousness with which our community is taken in our discussions about this particular proposal. I'd also like to thank the Douglas family, Cliff and his son Ben, the owners of the Tally Valley Golf Course, for making this meeting space available. Just in case you didn't know, this is the only par 5. It's the 7th hole on the southern Gold Coast. And also the Walk-In, which is the new restaurant downstairs. It's a beautiful spot. And of course we've got the integrated sporting facility in, what's it called again? I forget now. Rebound next door. So now I've got no doubt that Mr. Lee, the billionaire owner of the Chinese Ridong Group, will have someone here in some capacity. I can't see any drones about or anything of that nature, but we didn't invite him because we just thought we wanted to have a community meeting. So folks, unless I have nominations from the floor, I intend to chair this meeting. Do I have any nominations? Thank you for that. So let me just give to you what we propose to be the objective of this meeting. This is a community meeting, and on behalf of you, I suggest the objectives are as follows. There are 4 objectives. 1, to understand the project, which will be explained by City Planning staff. You've got some handouts there that have been made available to you, which show you the location of the project. I'll refer later in my comments to the 900 pages of reports that are on the Council's planning site. I've copied them and they're available in a Dropbox, but in the last week we haven't been able to sort of get on top of them, but that's going to be explained to you as to why they're hard to access. The second objective is to understand and discuss. I suggest A, flooding, whether it has been or will be due to apparent silting of the creek east of the M1, irrespective of whether this project goes ahead or not. B, traffic and environmental impacts, to name but a few, and C, the planning process. Objective 3, to decide whether we want this sort of development in the green behind the gold. Already Mr. Lee owns the top of Mount Tallebudgera, 400 hectares. I understand he owns a large portion at the end of the valley, and I understand he's just bought a large portion up on Mount Tamborine. So we're talking about a seriously important overseas investor who is obviously doesn't spend the tens of thousands of dollars that have been spent on these 900 pages of reports unless he thinks he's got a fair chance, subject to council approval. This project, like other projects where the community has softened up, the proponents include a museum, where I haven't heard a request for a museum around here in a long, long time. And you know, do we want tourists and day trippers and uncalled for traffic congestion as opposed to the amenity preferred by us? These are the things I would hope that we can get down and talk about tonight. Do we want Queen Street in the valley? To me, this development has all the hallmarks of an integrated resort development in one of the most pristine, environmentally significant rural sectors of our city. And what infrastructure does the community have to satisfy? Already this road out here is used, the connection road is used as a rat runner for the M1, and we all know that because we all live here. The 4th objective is to decide if those gathered here are moved to establish a committee to either prosecute opposition for or support opposition to or support for the project. Does anybody, your meeting, does anybody agree or disagree with those objectives? Do you think we can proceed on that basis? Right on. To that end, the order of speakers will be myself, the representatives of council to describe the project as they know it and the planning process. Councillor Daphne McDonald, do you intend to speak?
Just
briefly, Councillor Daphne. And then I guess it's going to be Councillor Young, did you intend to speak? No. So the councillors are here, say for Daphne too, and the planning staff, to get an idea of how we feel about it and what the issues are. And we're grateful for them for being here. And I guess it'll come back to me at the end to sense the mood of the meeting and assist with any votes of support or opposition in relation to this initial meeting. Now, as chair, I think I'm entitled to, seeing as we've got this Facebook page going, and you know, we've been keeping our eye on it. as chair, I'd now like to talk for a few minutes and start off the meeting. Does anybody object to that? Okay. I want to be balanced about this. I want to be balanced. I don't know really how I feel about this, although I obviously have a sense of opposition. But I'm happy to let the due process and information take its place. But I think it's important to have this meeting in some context. It was acknowledged by Mayor Tate on ABC radio last week that Mr. Lee, the multi-billionaire owner of Ridong, had not engaged with the Gold Coast City Council in any pre-application discussions, preferring to discuss the project with the state government. The Mayor said that it may be that Ridong sought the guidance of the state government. I believe that Ridong may have focused on the state government because maybe it wants the project to be classified as an integrated resort development, so that decisions regarding it can be within the political spectrum rather than the local government spectrum. The Mayor then went on to say, "I won't be asking the state government to call the project in," I'm quoting him here, "we want to assess it on its merits ourselves. When it comes to flood modelling, as an engineer, mate, I won't be allowing anyone building on our floodplain." I agree, to be congratulated for saying that. The Mayor then undertook to personally study the 500 pages of the application. In fact, there are more than 900 pages in supporting reports. He wasn't aware of that. There are 2 points worthy of comment of the Mayor's interview, in my humble opinion. If the Mayor is not going to allow anyone to build on our floodplain, then why would the council officers waste ratepayers' money and conduct flood modelling? The answer to that question, in my view, is twofold: because the state government is being lobbied by Ridong, and because it is not the Mayor alone in council who makes decision on developments. It is the council is in session. And the other question I ask, or the other point, is the law that the state government can call in a project for approval even though the local council does not ask it to? Someone's got to answer that question. I don't know the answer.
Yes.
It can. Well, there's the answer. Hence my cynicism. Now for some history. It's very important to understand history. First of all, our council is, I want to be balanced in what I say, our council is historically close to Ridong. For example, 1 month after being elected in 2012, Mayor Tate went overseas with the CEO of Ridong, Australia, at his own expense, to look at resorts, etc. in Hawaii and Florida. When he got back, he wrote to Jeff Sweeney on behalf of his council to call in the dual development, which Sweeney did, and in so doing, Sweeney overrode the previous council's opposition to the dual project, and Sweeney approved it as a project of state significance, or whatever they call it. Despite what the Mayor said this week, question mark. 2, it is apparent that Mayor Tate, who is a busy man, does not understand the history of the site. And this is important. Previous councils have allowed buildings to be put on the site in areas of the floodplain. For example, currently on the site are buildings that have been built on a condition of Gold Coast City Council approval, on ground elevated by digging from elsewhere on the site. The height of the elevations is just above 1 in a 100-year flood level. These buildings are the Bellagio mansion itself, that cost many millions to build, horse stables and other facilities. These council approvals, I believe, related to the rural nature of the activities to be conducted on the property, including the rural mansion Bellagio as a domestic residence. Thirdly, it needs to be recorded that before Mr. Lee's Ridong purchased the property, I have been informed, reasonably authoritatively I believe, that council refused approval for the previous owners to conduct commercial undertakings involving public gatherings for such things as weddings at the Bellagio mansion. I'm advised that the council refusal was probably due to, for it makes common sense, concerns as to flooding, re the safety of persons attending the events, whether enough safe car parking could be built up in the floodplain, and if it could, the probability that it would adversely impact on the height of flooding elsewhere, and presumably the inability of emergency service to safely access the site to protect life and property during flood. Even though Mr. Tate probably did not know, or Mayor Tate probably did not know this history, it certainly gives great compliment to the common sense in his statement this week on ABC radio that, mate, as an engineer, I won't be allowing anyone building in our floodplain. Fourthly, this massive development will encompass 47.6 hectares, only 2 of which, the Tallebudgera Creek Road rise, as I call it, just before Connection Road, are not in one of the biggest, fastest rising, fastest flowing coastal floodplains in southern Queensland, according to my estimations over the last 13.5 years. The floodplain out there is where the Pacific Ocean really meets the creek in times of high rainfall and high tide events. Fifthly, on the Sawtells land on Connection Road, there's a natural spring that flows into the Ridon land, and this, coupled with rain and floodwater quite naturally, is the habitat of various types of wild duck, native ducks and birds, and flora, including koala habitats both there and at the rear of the property. In the interests of transparency, I believe it's up to Mr. Lee to make available us photographs of the last flood on the property, showing flooding to any buildings and equipment, of which there must have been a considerable amount. Someone told me an aerial shot shows a submerged semi-trailer on the property, and I call upon Mr. Lee to either confirm or deny that. I understand there's a 50-metre easement in favour of the council around the land, and I encourage our councillors, as part of consideration of this process, to open up that easement to the public to walk around the land in question to observe how much flooding can occur and reference Mr. Lee's photos. And we do not want a repeat of Envirotech in Currumbin Valley putting up signs telling the community they could not walk on public land along the abutting Currumbin Creek. To mitigate risk of class actions at the expense of ratepayers, Mr. Lee and Council will need to do extreme due diligence on, may I suggest, Councillor O'Neill, on behalf of Division 14 house and landowners up street who live in Tallebudgera Creekside, some of whom are my clients, as to the propensity for this project to increase flooding by changes to the Connection Road floodplain, if it's going to involve, which it appears it is from the material that you have, incorporation of further site build-up for constructed developments, long roads, car parks, thereby causing a dam-like effect, slowing down the traverse of water downstream and increasing the backup flooding to properties upstream and on perimeters such as this club and houses adjacent. The last flood here, Ben, I don't know if you're still here, mate, the last flood here was 6 times higher than the previous flood. Right? Went right through everything, you know, it was amazing, and completely wrecked next door. We need to discuss tonight to what extent the silting up of the creek immediately east of the M1 is contributing to upstream flooding with or without this development. So, I think Mr. Lee and his advisors personally have got to front us and be subject to community scrutiny and challenge, whether by questions and answers or by challenging reports from third parties organised by our communities. It's my view that, given the danger and significance of this, that we need independent reports, and I think the council should fund them, independent reports challenging the proponents' reports, which, let's be honest, with all due respect, those people have been paid lots of money, and you can hardly call them independent. I'm not suggesting the reports are wrong, but you know, justice doesn't have to be done; it also has to be seen to be done. So, with that in mind, unless anyone has any comments, and thank you for hearing me out, because I have done quite a bit of research on this, I now invite to speak Mr. Steve Brett. He's going to talk about the project as he knows it, and he's going to talk about the process with his colleague.
Thanks, Jim. Firstly, thanks for having us here tonight. We're here to provide a brief overview of the proposal and also the DA process that might be foreign to some of you, but largely we're here to really understand your concerns so it can be considered in the assessment of the application.
Speak up a bit, please.
Sorry, I'll take this back. The application was lodged late September. It's early on in the assessment stage, so our team is still reviewing all the information in order to understand the proposal ourselves. The process...
Steve, could I ask you to move
Yeah, just go forward a couple of minutes. Yeah, that's fine.
Right, sorry guys.
Thank you.
So the process can be quite long. All the application material is available on PD Online, Council's website. Everyone can access and view that. You need to understand the application number, which we have with us tonight, as well as you can use the address to do so. I'll run through the process a bit more after Hoagie gives a bit of a brief of the overview, which I'll let him do now.
Excuse me, could you tell us about that CON? Yeah, which we're having a bit of difficulty.
Yep, so PD Online is our internet website that you can view all development applications. There's 2 versions to it because we upgraded our system in start of July. You need to use the updated version of it because the application was lodged post-July. The application number, do you have that?
Is COM/2018/47.
Could you repeat that?
47.
47.
Yes.
So that number you can use. That's one option to search for the application. Otherwise, you can use the property address to do so. You can view all the plans that are lodged by the applicant as well as the supporting and specialist reports.
So obviously Jim has covered off on the fact that the proposal is essentially or being marketed to us, or I suppose within the material itself described as an integrated resort complex, of which a number of components make that up. So there are 98 hotel suites in total. Hotel suites being, I suppose, something else which I'll go into later. So 90 of those are within 2 of the 5-storey hotel wings. And stop me if I don't want to be just throwing numbers at you guys, so let me know if any of these are an issue or need to be repeated. There are 166 private villas, so you would have seen those spread across the arms scattered throughout the lake system which is being proposed. 54 of those are intended to be solely for short-term accommodation, so 54 of those villas, and 112 of those villas, and those are the 112 in the northernmost precinct, are intended to be both for short-term purposes and for permanent residences. So they have the flexibility, I suppose, depending on the owner. There's also a large dwelling proposed in the southeastern corner, which is a standalone dwelling. As Jim touched on, there's an art gallery and museum that's circa 15,000 square metres of commercial floor area. There's a healthcare and wellness centre, of which includes 40 treatment rooms, and there are 3 restaurants. So those last 3 components essentially feature within the northern precinct of the development and are intended to be open to the public, whereas the rest of the development, as we understand it, is essentially closed off or involves a gated community. There's also a wedding chapel proposed. As I touched on, there's a lake system which is intended to be privately owned and maintained. And the purpose of, I suppose, providing that lake is essentially to facilitate cut-fill balance, which is earthworks essentially to mitigate external impacts or external impacts associated with flooding. So essentially keeping the same amount of earth on the site, it's just shifting it around to create flood-free land. And then within the southern portion, as the site abuts Currumbin Creek, is a 40-metre proposed covenant. So sorry if that seemed like it was a whole lot of numbers. Were there any questions associated with, I suppose, what I've just outlined?
Yes, could you extrapolate, please, on moving the soil around?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to understand quite clearly, there's Q100 flood levels, there are flood requirements, there are mitigation requirements. You can't build on an area that is underneath the Q100 flood level. So I'd like to understand, to offset that, there has got to be lakes. Now, I'm having a little trouble correlating between lakes and moving soil around and getting to an acceptable level for flood mitigation. If you could help me, please.
Yeah, sure. I can't, I suppose, go into whether or not there are external impacts, because as Steve alluded to, a lot of the material is still being reviewed. But I suppose the lakes are being dug out, and that soil is then being used to create additional flood-free land, of which can then be developed upon.
One could always say that when they dig big hole here, and it's in a floodplain, the first flood that comes through is going to fill that hole up. But where you put all that dirt as a levee, if you like, or a raised platform, it's going to bank up right upstream. It's going to impact the other houses right around.
So can I just say, hold that thought. We can come back to these. Let's get the full information first about the planning process, and then we can ask some questions or highlight some concerns. How do you feel about that? The one thing I wanted to confirm that I thought I heard you say was that the proposal has been lodged with you as an integrated resort development with council. Is that correct?
It's, I suppose, the terminology used from an official sense are based on land uses.
Yeah.
But the way that it is loosely described is, I suppose, an integrated resort in that the uses are intended to lend well to one another. So I suppose somebody staying at the resort would likely use the health and wellness centre, likely visit the art gallery.
Yeah. Well, that's what I think we all know as an integrated resort. I've just got a question over here.
Yes, could you please explain the zoning and the sits within the urban footprint. And then in terms of the zoning itself, it's within the rural zone and is also, I suppose, affected by the rural landscape environment precinct. So that precinct generally applies to areas of map vegetation.
Okay, are there any questions other than the levee bank impact and the flooding? Because we were going to hold that because that's a very important point. Anybody else like to ask a question?
Just interested in why this application is so different and there wasn't any pre-application discussions with the council and why did it go to state government, because I feel like that's quite important.
Yeah, so well, I suppose at the end of the day, it is an applicant-driven process. So council, I suppose, don't really have any control over that. So it was the applicant's prerogative as to what direction they elected to go down. And I suppose with a proposal like this, I'll be honest, that particularly with the major projects that we see, we'll have quite a lot of meetings leading up to the lodgement of the development application. That wasn't the case. The applicant elected not to do so this time around, which again is their prerogative to do. We had a pre-lodgement meeting a week before they lodged it, and to be frank, it's essentially as what it was lodged. I suppose what was put to us in that meeting. There may be additional material. Well, there's certainly additional technical material, but in terms of some of their arguments, they may have changed those. But it is what we saw on that day, more or less. There hasn't been a whole lot of lead-up time from our perspective.
This was only lodged at the end of September, so we're pretty quick. Well, late September, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry, Phil.
Question, it's a impact accessible application, I would understand, is that correct?
Yeah, it's impact accessible and they're seeking a development permit. So we often see large-scale developments that are seeking for a preliminary approval. So it's getting a concept approved. This one is for a development permit.
It has an unusual number, it's not an MCU 201847. It's a COM, I don't understand what that will be.
That represents a combined application because it has a material change of use component and a reconfiguring a lot component, which is essentially a subdivision.
Right, okay. A number of people have tried to get onto PD Online using those numbers, leaving out the forward slashes and so on,
Yep.
to know about. So can that be tested in council as well?
Yeah.
Because it has been extremely difficult. In fact, I've been unable to get detailed information.
We got onto it today using, well, at work, going via the internet. You do have to use each of the lines, be quite particular with the COM /2018/47, and that should work to get the application material up. If that doesn't work, the site address is a good way to do it. There's an option.
People have actually tried to put COM /
Yeah.
2018/47 as well as leave out all of that, just put the numbers, and it still hasn't worked. So
Yeah, we tested it today, and it's just when you first go into planning and development online, be sure you check the version, because now we have that two versions of it, as I mentioned before. Choose the one the application was lodged after June 28. So you need to be in that version to see it because it's only recently been lodged.
And just under the impact assessment, there'll be, 15 days in which people can provide their submissions, is that right?
Yeah, I might quickly go through the DO process now, if you don't mind.
Could I just ask you to hold that, because I think it's important. I've got one more question, and I'd like Councillor McDonald to speak. Yes, yeah. Just one more question, please.
Question, are these developers applying for their own codes outside of the city plan assessment codes as has been done in Aurora?
No, when we see the preliminary approvals, they often do that, but as I mentioned, it's for a development permit, so it's not seeking to create their own codes.
Okay, so before we go on to understand the planning process, I'd like to invite Councillor McDonald, who's the Division 13 councillor, in whose division this project is proposed to be undertaken. Please go ahead.
Thanks very much for the invitation here tonight, Jim. With this particular development, it does sit outside the town plan, and there is, what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's only one dwelling on the property that's allowed. Is that under rural? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
That's correct. So there's one dwelling that's allowed on this particular site. So, this is a big change that's been applied for. But it is impact development, and I would encourage everyone, as soon as it's advertised, for you to have your say, to get in and have your say, whether you support or don't support this particular development. There's a number of issues that I do have with this particular development, and we were advised on the 20th of September. We were notified as per the major project notice that came to all the councillors at that time. And I understand with the officers, they had a pre-lodgement meeting on the 11th of September. I did see where the applicant had a number of meetings going back from the 30th of July, the 10th of August, 17th of August, 10th of September, 17th of September, there was another one. And when I asked about those particular meetings, it wasn't with our council officers, and I understand they had meetings with the state government. So what I would encourage everyone to do is to get onto PD Online, make sure that you're familiar with what's been applied for, because we're looking here at not only all of those developments, but we're also looking at 224 car parks plus 45 visitor car parks. So it's a pretty big development that's being applied for. And this could have major impacts for all of those properties upstream, also downstream, and it's a big change for the area. But if anyone's got any questions that they want, my office is available, my phone number and you can pick it up all on the website, but also our officers are there to answer any of your questions. So, and I'd really encourage you to get involved, because it's your community, it's our community, and I'd really encourage you to get involved and have your say.
Would anybody like to make a comment on what Councillor McDonald said? Okay, well, we'll move on to the planning process now, please, gents. That's much appreciated. Sorry, any...
At the council offices, where were the meetings held?
From what I can understand and the information that I've gathered, and I understand they are held with the state government.
Okay, so just following off on that question then, so just being cynical here, just making a comment. Isn't this a little bit wishy-washy when state government appear to be in control of this process? And they can red pen whatever decisions the community come up with and the council come up with?
Well, that's why I said in my introduction that this is what we're confronted with. And I think given what happened on the dual development, etc., you're entitled to that cynicism. So the purpose of this meeting is to express that concern that you have. I've already expressed it, and I think I see a few nods around the room. So notwithstanding what our mayor said, that no one's going to build anything on our floodplain. So we're dealing. That's why I said I'm of the view that this project, even people may disagree with me, this is already in the political spectrum, it's not in the local government spectrum. And this is what we have to guard against, and this is why Councillor McDonald's suggestion to you that you should all get involved in this is very, very timely and particularly appropriate in this particular development, in my humble opinion. Gentlemen, if I could invite you to talk about... Sorry?
So essentially you're saying that no matter what we do, no matter what the Gold Coast Council says, the state government can come in and say they're allowed to build it. Is that what we're doing?
If history is any indication,
yes.
It mightn't be the state government, it might be a future
Correct.
state government. These people are long, patient investors, I can tell you. You don't get to be a billionaire by being impetuous. So this is the issue. This is the issue that is coming up tonight, that notwithstanding what the mayor said, it's in another forum
Correct.
that we have to be mindful of in view of precedents.
Yep.
That's all. So we can't, it's too early yet to... We've got to investigate this. If you elect a committee tonight, this is one of the things that's got to be investigated, and clarity's got to be brought to the community about it. I don't think there's anyone within this meeting that would disagree with that comment. So on that note, we hand over to council officers about the planning process. So thank you, gents.
So as we mentioned before, it's at the start of the process. Now, the DA process can be a long process. We start with the stages, I guess. So we've got the confirmation stage, which is us council acknowledging receipt of the application. Then we go into the information referral stage, and this is when we review the application to understand what further information we need in order to assess the application. And that's where we're at the moment. Council is the assessment manager, and the state government are a referral agency for this application. So there's a number of reasons why they are involved in the assessment as a referral agency. The roads that surround the property are both state roads, as well as the Tallebudgera Creek as well. So once council and the state government have the ability to request further information, once we do this, it is then on the applicant to respond to that information request. Now they can take 3 months to do so, and that can be extended if they need to more time to do the response. Once they've responded to both council's and the state government's information request, they then need to publicly notify the development, and that is for 15 business days, as mentioned before. Once they've notified, that is your time to make any public submissions. So you'll have 15 business days to lodge your concerns or submissions on the development, and then they'll become properly made, providing you have all your correct details there, and then that's there for council officers to formally consider in the process. Now, once notification is complete and the state government have made their position on the application as from a referral agency point of view, so that could be either conditions of approval or a position to refuse the application. Once we get the response from state government, we then enter the decision-making stage, and then we do our assessment and then provide a recommendation for council to consider. In terms of dates of when the public notification is to occur, we don't have a set date at this point because it is dependent on applicants responding to that information request. If you go on PD Online now, you might see that there's a date linked to public notification as well as decision. Those dates are fluid, they will change, so don't be concerned if you see a date for public notification to occur next week. It's not going to happen next week. That's the
Anybody have a question? Because I certainly have one. Anybody have a question? Thanks very much, Steve. You talk about our concerns and submissions being submitted. Now there are 900 pages, 3 reports being submitted, from acid sulphate soils to environmental to God knows what. I haven't read them all yet because I've got many other things to read, as have most of the people here. But in the absence of our community being able to compete with the tens and tens, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars of detail that's in those reports, in the absence of that happening, and us forming a committee and everybody we get a sponsor or put in ourselves and come up with some other reports. By the way, I believe the council should do that, but that's another story. In the absence of that, so I write in and say, oh, I don't agree with it because it's flooding and this and that. I mean, can you explain to me what weight you can possibly give in a credible way to our community, you know, where Johnny's from the street, so to speak, to something like this when there's 900 pages of reports and we don't have the technical ability, we haven't engaged the similar consultants to actually challenge what these people are saying. Can you please explain that to us?
Yeah, so council, the assessment of the application is not done by just Hoagie and myself. We have a team of professionals who are skilled in different areas. For example, transport engineers, hydraulic engineers, environmental planners. It's our role to assess all those documents, the specialist reports, and form a position on that. In terms of submissions, any submissions that are made, we need to give weight to that and consider it in our recommendation to council.
Yeah, I don't think that answers Jim's question, and the reality of your response there, and Jim's absolutely right. We can't possibly compete in a 900-page report without due funding. Now, you mentioned the comment, and I highlighted it as a specialised report. Now, it's specialised and very subjective because obviously this person has interest to want to make sure this proceeds. So you're not dealing with an objective report. It's the same with any research. Whatever research and whatever outcome you want, you put the money on the table and you get the response you want. And that's ultimately what we're talking about here. In terms of us getting an objective view on all these assessments, you've not answered Jim's comment, and my question to you is, in similar circumstances where other major projects have been put forward, where have those who oppose it been able to get through realistic opportunities, where they've actually put through another assessment that is viewed as objective? Because I'm not not seeing that response here at this point in time.
As I said before, we have a team of professionals whose role in the organisation is to
Is there all your
impartial
assess
assessment.
their report? What I'm saying to you is, where is our opportunity and where is our funding to be able to put forward a countenance to that? I'm not disputing your competency to review those documents. What I'm suggesting is that those documents have a deeply vested interest, and in all reality, probably lack any veracity other than the fact that someone's got a deep pocket. So please don't give me the same answer again. I'll ask you, what is the response that we can actually realistically put forward?
Can I answer that one? So I work with these guys. The answer is that we as officers don't have any answer that I think you want to hear. There is no ability for us to give funding to this group or anyone else to go and commission their own reports. That's something for you guys to consider and for Jim to consider, perhaps write to the local councillor. But I guess the answer is that there is nothing that officers can do to support funding any additional studies on behalf of the community. As Steve said, we have officers at work who assess these reports. They're all trained and qualified and professional in their respective fields.
No one doubts that.
So our assessment is...
My contention is this: you're reviewing a series of reports and analysis to justify an application that is funded by the applicant. They are not going to give you a report that says don't approve my proposal because it's on floodland. So let's be serious. What we need to be able to do is put forward an countenance to that. And as I understand, we've got 15 days to lodge our objections. On the 15th day, we put in a 1,800-page report which countenances all those arguments. Is that the reality of the situation? Just so that I'm clear.
I'm not sure I follow your question. If you submit an 1,800-page report, the council officers will assess that report.
Right, okay.
The issue is, thank you for your support on the question. The issue that I see is that no community, unless they've got funding, can go and get the quality and depth of reports that are objective, that can contest the assertions made in the application to our good council officers. Therein lies the problem. It's certainly not a problem that these gentlemen can resolve. They're as you acknowledge, they're put there to do their job. But it becomes a political question for us as a community, does it not? Yeah. So, are you happy if we just leave that one there? And thank you for your contribution.
Can I just make one?
Yeah, sorry. Councillor O'Neill, please.
I'll just ask the officers, there are cases when you're assessing a development application where you may not agree with the report that's been given. Your assessors, your guys may not agree with it, and they say that in their report. Is that correct?
That's correct. Development applications are received all the time. We have, I think, over 500 with the organisation at any point in time. The specialist reports are always funded by the applicant. This is a position that we're accustomed to and we have to deal with on a daily basis.
Okay, well, look, I think... Sorry,
can I just ask, do council also review past events? So the events of Cyclone Debbie, council would have invested a large sum of money to review the effects that it had on the community and the flood levels, and they've taken new flood data from that event. Will they take in consideration that event in relation to the approval of this process? Because there was a number of number of streets that went under flood that have never flooded before.
That's exactly right.
Large street.
Massive issue. Massive issue. I've got a question when you're ready.
Can we get a response whether goes to do that first?
Yeah. So what the officers will assess it against is the latest flood model that council has. So council just a new version of the town plan came into effect on the 20th of September with the latest flood modelling information, and that is the information that we'll be using to assess this application. So it's not against any particular one-off event. So all of these events get fed into a flood model, and our statutory obligation is to assess it against that latest flood model.
And will you make that available to the community, that assessment?
So the flood model is available to the
your
community
assessment
now.
of the impact of this.
Yeah.
Will you make that available to our community in plenty of time so that we can have a look at that and get our own advice if we can possibly afford it?
All the information, I guess, as we go through this DA is available on PD Online, so Council's information request will be there. When the officers finish their assessment, that report will be available on PD Online as well, and because by the nature of this application it will go to the Council for a decision, you'll be able to get a copy of that on the Council agendas as well.
Just one question. So the flood levels have changed, have they?
They have, they have changed, so across the city, they've varied, gone up. Not here, somewhere has gone down, but the flood model, not here. So yes, you're right.
Okay, we have another question, please.
Have any of you seen the flooding yourselves in Tallebudgera Valley at hand? Have you actually seen this? Because I would like to say that 13 years ago, I came straight from Bondi Junction into Golden Valley Road. We had an illegal dwelling on the back of our property, which had been contracted to be built. And we had deaths, we had 3 emergency evacuations via helicopter. I mean, you've never seen anything like it. Now, the last flood that went through, out here on the Connection Road, where this is so glossy and beautiful, great idea, however, unless you've actually seen it yourselves, what happened to the back of the Connection Road in the last flood, I'm talking on a personal level, yourselves. Have you seen what happened in the last flood? So it's all very well to say, and the last one's been updated to the best of our ability. However, you need to have actually seen what happened. We lost horses, we lost people, we lost houses. I'm the doctor's wife. I had to actually carry someone out of the back of our property in the flooding that went through 7 years ago. I'm asking you on a personal level, not on a clinical level, if you've actually witnessed what goes on out there while you're doing all of this paperwork and running around with phone calls.
Well,
it's massive.
Who has witnessed that flooding?
It's a massive, massive issue.
Can I just say, before you answer that, can I just say the owners of this facility, Ben, his family, and Cliff Douglas, who live over here, had to be evacuated urgently from these premises in that last event. And that's a scary thing, you know, very scary thing. And I'm sure those stories go right back up the valley.
It's extraordinary, and I'm saying that with love. It's extraordinary. I'm saying this gently. You really need to have your fingers on the pulse of the general public that live in the valley, because I promise you, there's not much that rocks my boat, but I'll promise you, I've seen some really wild stuff since I've been living out here, and it's pretty serious what we're talking about. This is a flood zone, and this will go underwater. You've never seen water move. Like we had 5 dead horses the last flood, just around the corner. There's no way that any billionaire plus is going to have the technology to stop the rain coming off these mountains. You must be out of your mind even considering it.
I think we should let the council officers respond to that comment. Thank you very much.
Can I just say that this development, it's not a prohibited development. We don't have any say on whether we can accept an application in the door or not. So to say that you don't know why we're considering it, we're bound to consider it and we have to assess it. We don't have any choice in that respect as officers. So the application's lodged. It's in the early stages now.
We've already got a green gunner. Why are we doing all
Okay,
this?
right.
We haven't done anything
Let
yet.
the
All I'm
council
saying is that
Sorry about that.
the application, whether we like it or not, the applicant has a right to lodge an application. That doesn't mean it gets automatically approved.
Oh,
or
well,
refused.
we've gone through Boral. This is just going to be not an issue.
Yeah, so, we've got to go through the
Yeah.
assessment, we've got to have a look at the flooding. you know, that is our job as professional officers, and that's what we'll do. So.
I'll put my trust
Okay, well,
into that.
I think
Thank you.
that's notwithstanding that the Mayor said the other day on radio, mate, no one's going to build anything on our floodplain. So the council officers, we're paying them as ratepayers all this money to go and do this assessment, even though our Mayor, presumably on behalf of his council, which is usually mostly unanimous, so, you know, we're right to have the cynicism that we have, I think, and right to ask the questions that we ask. Don.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to raise an issue. What happens when it's not raining? And we get back to the preferred amenity. What is the character of the area? What is the vision? Well, the vision is englobo land, a lot of it, and so the vision is irrelevant. It's always been countryside, rural living. But I want to just tell you 5 dot points, I think it is, 6 dot points, from the oldest environmental and biodiversity group in the world. And when they talk about the amenity, they say that land within a green belt, and whereas we could probably consider this green belt land, it says 1, to check the unrestricted sprawl of large build-up areas. 2, to prevent neighbouring towns from merging into one another. 3, to assist in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. 5, to preserve the setting and special character of historic towns. And 6, to assist in urban regeneration by encouraging the recycling of derelict and other urban land. So, you know, when it's not raining, there's a massive issue here, and it's called the amenity and the character of the area. And if this got through, that sets a precedence for the entire Currumbin and Tallebudgera Valley.
Thank you, Rob. Does anybody else want to ask a question? Because I certainly would like to make a statement.
It's more of a point, but I think in opposition we're looking at several levels. These lads are just working here on behalf of us, working for the Gold Coast Council, and even if they recommended to the committee that they refuse the application, there's plenty of history that the committee chooses to pass the application. So even if you put your reports together and these guys say, no, we recommend refusal, there's no guarantee at all in the current environment with top pay that it won't get through.
In politics, there's no certainty.
But that comes back to the town plan, because the town plan's been broken all the time. So if you stick to the, you know,
That's right.
I call it gaming the town plan.
yeah, so the idea of the town plan's there, so that we have a say in how the areas develop.
Okay, well, I think that's entirely valid. Does anybody want to support or challenge that comment? Okay, look, I just have one other. Gentlemen, thanks very much. Yeah, I'd like to give the council a once again, we do really appreciate you coming to give us this information. I think some of the questions were a bit direct, including maybe one of mine. But this is, as Don said and others have indicated, this is really, really important to us. So we are really grateful to you for coming. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And to your boss for letting you come. So yeah. Look, the other issue that I have, which I think is part of the flooding issue, you'll notice on that map there's that road that's going around to the interconnectivity of the road on the western side. You'll see there's a road there. That road will be above a 1 in 30 year flood in my view, and you know, those buildings that are there are facing right into the teeth of the flood, the flood and the speeding flood water and the high rising quick roll. I've seen that thing go underwater in 2 hours.
Yeah, it's
and it's frightening. And so, you know, that's what we're looking at there, and that's what concerns places like here and other residential properties upstream and everywhere else. That you put a levy in there, which is going to have to happen, and a number of levies, and hallelujah, brothers and sisters, start praying. So, but that's subject to flood modelling. I get it. But the other thing that concerns me about this is when you put international gardens in, and when you put lakes in, and goodness knows what else, when those floods come through, forget about the acid sulphate soil, the guys are going to, but what is the vegetation that's going to be put in there? Already we've got Singapore daisy just about killing the whole valleys. What happens when those flood? What's going to be in those lakes? Are they going to be carp, or what's going to happen? What's going to happen to those seeds of that flora and fauna? They have a completely different biodiversity downstream, and for that matter upstream when the birds get at it, because you know that's so these are things that are about the amenity and the green behind the gold that I think we all need to value just as much as an issue as we do the safety and the property values and God knows what else of flooding and loss of life and animals and heavens above. So there's a whole. I just like to, in saying that, I'm just supporting what the gentleman over here said, that there are a range of issues. Okay. Well, look. Is there any other question or comment? Yes.
Just on the side, talking about levies and that, I noticed that there's a bit of a surreptitious levy building on the Coptic Golf Course, where they've imported sand in, probably from a building site over in Palm Beach.
Well,
spreading that out and raising.
That's a Division 14 issue.
It changes the water flow there already, which
well,
may have.
You can change it in two ways. You can change it by building it up, or you can change it by making it completely grass, so the speed of the water flowing across it goes a lot more quicker. I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know whether Councillor O'Neill wants to comment on that or not.
I can make some inquiries, but I'm not aware that that's going to have any effect on it.
Thank you. So there is some concern about that. Philip, you had a.
Thanks, Jim. Just a question. I think within the last decade, the then state government was actually wanting to prohibit any further canal estates. Now, a lot of this development proposal appears to be much like a canal estate. So I'm just wondering whether that falls foul of any particular legislation that was formally introduced. So can you Michael, you might know, I'm not sure who might know whether or not canal estates are actually allowable even as a potential land use nowadays.
I'm not sure, to be honest, on that one. I'm not aware of any legislation. It's something that we can look into, but off the top of my head, I don't know.
Can you find out? Would you be able to find out?
I'll try. Just not really sure where to start. Perhaps we can get something to write in and point us in the right direction. Yeah.
I had another question there somewhere. Oh, sorry, sir. Yeah. Did you have a question?
Just along with what this gentleman was saying, along with Coptic, I just come past there on the way here, and you can see there's a levee that's being built right along there, and they're flicking seed onto it, get grass up, grown, and it just looks like it's part of the golf course. If you come a bit further up the road, you'll see there's a couple of fresh piles right near where the gate where the truck's coming in and dumping. And I've just seen that now on the way here. So I haven't got seed on that yet. Good time of the year too, and it's growing.
Well, I know that concerns. I know that concerns the owners of this place. Look, I think the thing to say here is this is not like a high-rise development project down on the beach. You know, we all got our views on whether that's good, bad, or indifferent. This is an interconnected ecosystem here, right? Which happens to involve 2 divisions and probably even 3 for all I know. It goes 20 kilometres back up into the hinterland. It's got a tidal floodplain here, and it morphs into the sea. This is a very, very complicated, high-risk, multifaceted consideration like nothing else ever before that we've seen, certainly on the eastern side of the Gold Coast Highway. And, you know, for all I know, the western side, anywhere west of the M1 to me is the hinterland. But so I think that's the sort of take that I've got on it. Yes.
I just want to remind people that Songqing is another development also by a Chinese company on the Carrara floodplain, and it has major issues, and it's been referred to the state government for assessment, and they keep getting extensions. I think the next decision date is the 13th of December. So there isn't a great deal of difference between Songqing and this, really, in terms of the impact on floodplain. And I'd also remind people that the council has approved buildings on the floodplain. This council has approved buildings on the floodplain, and one that comes to mind is the one in the Robina area, where the approval was subject to the body corporate having 3 boats to get people out, and 3 days of tinned food, including baked beans, for the residents. So it's not funny when you think about it, but these things do get approved by councils, regardless of what the officer's recommendations are.
Folks, I went through the 1974 flood in Brisbane. I lost my car, and I tell you, I lost the freeway, don't worry. And I tell you, it was horrendous. The heartache and the loss of property and the speed with which it all happened. I mean, I know there was human intervention in it. And I also was born and bred out in the Channel Country of Western Queensland. I tell you, I've seen rivers and creeks come up quicker than you can say Jack Robinson. So this is what unnerves me about this so dramatically and why I agree with your concerns. Can I just raise another question? And that is, there is a concern about, I am informed that any dredging that was to occur east of the M1, which has silted up dramatically in the time that I've been here, is a city council issue. Now, I personally can't see how that isn't a factor that we should be taking into account anyway in relation to the last flood, and specifically interdependent with or interconnected with any proposal that Ridong has. Does anybody have any views on that or any concerns on that? Yes, Tom.
Professor Bob Morris, a very wise Professor Bob Morris, said many years ago that it's one thing to open all of that up, Jim, and dredge all of that. The more you dredge, the more water you let back in. And of course, when you think about it, that makes a hell of a lot of common sense. So that brings us back to where we started, with proper regard for the Q100 flood level and not standing in the way of flood mitigation, not affecting the flood plains. That's all.
Thank you. Does anybody else have a comment on that? Because it's not a Gold Coast Waterways responsibility. Harold Morris is a very responsive CEO there, has informed me of that. I've informed the council of that. So, you know, if that's something that people want to have a view about, then you know, what you say hydrologically makes sense to me. But you know, it might be something that we need to consider further. Unless any, sorry?
Sorry, my question is in relation to the last flood that we did have, and because we've got a couple of councillors here, I'm not sure if they would like to respond to what actions has Gold Coast City Council, what steps are they taking to prevent any further floods occurring in our environment, such as the maintenance of the waterways and maintenance of drains being cleaned out, things like that. Is there any comment on what action steps the council have put in place to try and prevent the flooding being so severe?
Any of the councils like to comment?
And if not, how can we find out what steps, what procedures the council are going to put in place?
Councillor Neal?
Well, as you know, they've probably rebuilt some of the culverts already and repaired the bridges. I've had council officers looking at individual properties and claims that the creek, just because of what the council's done on the roads, may have upset the course of the water. Our officers are saying that that's not right. So, and I think that some of you may have attended the flood recovery workshops in Tallebudgera just recently, and they did actually have.
But they haven't responded. So
no, but you had a council officer out there who is going to respond to some of the questions that were raised in that workshop.
Yeah, we keep asking, and there is still no response. That's after multiple letters, multiple
and also the creek, the
information.
Creek is state responsibility as well. So it's a combination of council and state that look after that. As I said, they're still actually in the process of repairs, to tell you the truth.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
And they haven't finished that either. So,
so can I just say that some of the repairs that they have done, and I'm speaking specifically from my property on Tally Creek Road, which is impacted by the fact that Tally Creek Road was rebuilt 2 metres above what the existing floodplain was, and then when that water comes down, it causes our property to flood worse than it's ever been flooded, and that's because of that road and the lack of drainage under that road. The water cannot get away. So add to that something like this, if it were to go ahead, we already suffered horrifically in that flood.
Yeah.
But hasn't the hydraulic engineers responded?
They have not responded.
Initially?
They have not talked to us. Not once.
Because I know that it's been put through to them, and I know that from the recovery workshop as well, it's gone back.
I brought it up at the last barbecue with Michelle and said, we have not been responded to. No one has talked to us.
I've lived here since we moved into our place in Yalawar Drive. We bought our land in 1970 and we moved in 72, and we were here when the 74 flood was on. And one of the other issues that we have to consider is the king tides, because I can remember when that flood in 74, we were probably fortunate down this end because we were on a different river system to what they are over in Burleigh and further up. And what happened down at certainly down through the valley here in 74, we had weeks that was in, I can remember it because we'd not long been in our home, and there was a vacant block of land next door to us, and cars were being parked on the block of land. At that time, the Tallebudgera Creek at the mouth was all sorted over, and my husband went down with shovels and had to shovel it out to get some of the water out. If we had have had more rain with those king tides, all of Palm Beach, Eleanor would have all gone under. And that's the real issue that has to be considered here, the impact not only on the water coming down from the hills, but also any of the king tides.
Absolutely.
So when you're doing your submissions, that's another area to look at.
Thank you. 1998, and I don't know if you know it or not, but the last big flood in Brisbane, which I went up to help friends clean up. We've got to get your tetanus needles, you've got to do all that for Chihuahuas on the whole shooting match. Not very pleasant. No. Right? We dodged the bullet down here because that low system sat up there, it didn't come down here. And I think even the mayor said that at the time, whoever the mayor was. Look, I'm going to, I had in mind that we would finish this meeting by 7:15. I think there's been unless others feel to the contrary, I think there's been a good airing of the issues. I think it's been done in a constructive way. Thank you very much. Does anybody else want to make a comment?
Jim, can I just ask the council just one more question? And forgive me, I probably lost some of those numbers in terms of the museum and the car parks and the fixed dwellings and the holiday dwellings. Is there a sense here of a maximum occupancy on a daily basis? Are we talking potentially another 1,000 people living on this 45 hectare site or transitioning through there? There must be a sense of what that number looks like, because obviously the concern there is a result of traffic on what is already a very poor imitation of a route to get between places. So is there a sense of that? I'm sure you guys would have some sort of formula as to what kind of occupancy we'd expect out of all of that?
To be honest, there isn't at this point in time. Generally, obviously, it's a little bit of guesswork, and it's based on the number of bedrooms. There are certain assumptions made as to how many people may occupy a bedroom. It is guesswork that we haven't looked into, I suppose, closely enough, given the time that we've had to review this application material yet. Is the concern related to traffic specifically?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, that's something that we can consider. Traffic numbers, my understanding of, I suppose, traffic generation isn't necessarily based on the number of people occupying the site. It's more based on, I suppose, cars and vehicular trips, which are based on, I suppose, different dynamics than bedroom numbers per se. So that would be considered, and I've already jotted down that traffic is a key concern. Thank you.
You know the problem we're having with the M1 at the moment from the Gold Coast to Brisbane? That's what's going to happen to Tallebudgera Creek Road. Mark my words.
No doubt about that.
Okay, so one further question.
Can I just add something to those issues? In that last breeding season, 2016-17, 6 koalas were hit and killed where sawtells met right in front of sawtells. So they are still crossing there. Once that population recovers, if this goes ahead, I reckon it'll be the local extension of them. So
Thank you.
that to it.
I know, I think Councillor O'Neill had VMS signs out there, didn't you? In recent times. Look, being an old bush boy, every bit of real estate's got a carrying capacity, right? And that's the issue that you're raising. What's the real carrying capacity of this area with or without this project? I don't think any of this. Sorry, I said, just taking up on this gentleman's point that every bit of real estate, every bit of land, be it semi-rural, rural, or out in Western Queensland, has carrying capacity of animals, and we're animals, you know. And I think that's a great point that you raised. What is the carrying capacity of these valleys really? I mean, the odd little subdivision here and there is probably not going to hurt, but when you congest it up with a destinational type development like's being proposed here, I certainly have some reservations. Yes?
Further on to the issue of the koalas, has this application been referred to the EPBC unit in Canberra, or have the applicants declared it will not have a significant impact? If the onus is on the applicants to do this, council will not refer this application on their own. It's up to the applicants. If the applicant says no, it won't have a significant impact, it's up to the community to then refer. So I think at this early stage, that's a really important consideration. Has it been referred or not? That's it.
So just in response to that question, so as Steve said, the application has been referred to state government for a number of reasons. Ecological value is one of those. Koala habitat specifically, I don't think is listed within that, and for the reason my understanding is that the nature of the vegetation being removed is largely marine plant based and not koala habitat based. We do, however, have a koala, I suppose, initiative going on, and we've got environmental planners that are overlooking the application as well. So
impacts from the development trigger the EPBC Act. It's not up to state government.
I can have a look into it.
The developer has to sign an affidavit that he has considered the EPBC listed species and whether or not there will be a significant impact. So if he stated no, there will not be a significant impact, it means he hasn't referred it. And later on we'll have our 14 days or whatever to suddenly start referring it to Canberra.
Well, there's something that we as a community have got to have a look at. Anybody else? It's now 7:10. I like to run a tight meeting, if you don't mind me saying so, bearing in mind it's a wet night and people want to get home. Happy to keep it going, but there's one more very important thing we have to do. So, hello? That's next time get a microphone, right? And secondly, open the bar. Where's Ben? Because I'm certainly very dry, but I only have one, I've got to drive up the hill. But look, if I can just say this in conclusion, I'd like to put to you that my sense is that what we're hearing here is that there is very real concern in a number of areas, not only flooding, about this particular project. Now, the reality of this is that where there are big projects like this, unless you get yourselves organised and get a committee going and look at how you're going to fund it and how you're going to get the timelines right and take into account the EPBC and all the objections that are possible within the resources that the community may have. Unless we do that, I'd say we are leaving our community the subject of what I would call the political spectrum, if not some of the lack of objectivity that the community might be able to put in counter to the reports, not of the proponent, notwithstanding the good job that our council officers do, and notwithstanding the difficulties in these sort of projects for our councillors. You know, the community's got to take ownership of these sort of matters. Now, I'd like to suggest to you that if you do, that we try and elect a committee of 3 or 4 or 5. I don't propose to be your spokesperson. I think it's wider than that. I've had a bit of a political career, as some of you probably know or attempt. I'm a different person these days. I've got too many grandkids and they're all over the country. So I'm happy to talk. Maybe I'm happy to do a bit of talking, but I want to. I put it to you, and somebody might like to get up and talk about this now, and I'll certainly stand aside if that's what you want to have some sort of a steering committee organised to get our heads and minds around this and to report back to the community here or at this venue preferably. Next time I'll get a microphone. No disrespect meant to Ben, who's going to open the bar soon. So can someone talk to me about that, please?
We had a committee going through with our Borrell argument, our Borrell problem. We had a various amount of residents in Tallebudgera Valley who namely were law related, going from one end of the Gold Coast to the other, that were all over presenting a committee in order to fight Borrell.
And you were successful?
We were successful. And my argument, or my suggestion would be that we go ahead and start thinking about those strategies in order to sort this out in our defence.
Do I have anybody who would like to speak for or against that? So, if that's the case, is there anybody here that wants to, even only if it's loosely to start, to kick it along? Because, Councillor Lynn, we do have a fair bit of time in this, notwithstanding, don't we? Yeah.
I think you'd have in excess of 6 months.
Yeah, in excess. So we can start it off, have more community meetings, and as we develop the momentum of it, if you like, for want of better words, then we might be able to expand it. So I'm not hearing people putting their hands up. It's worrying me.
Because the powers that be that I know about aren't in this room. They're all in the valley. They haven't come here. So we'll need to be going and doing letterbox drops. I have to get the printer organised.
Well, we'll have to do that. And what we're going to do is put an edited version of it on Save Our Southern Valley's Facebook page. Yeah. Everybody go and like that page and be there and share it, please, with your friends in the valley. So maybe it's premature. Maybe it's premature that we should be doing that.
So how we communicate and keep updated with all this through
through Save Our Southern Valley's Facebook page, of which I'm the administrator of, but maybe when you get a committee you might decide, because that's historical, maybe you might decide, the committee might decide they want to have their own Facebook page and they want to do it completely differently. I'm not here to influence that. So, all right, well look, I think it's a resolution then that what we will do is perhaps, this lady here and myself, sorry I don't know your name, we'll have a further discussion about how we circularise people to come along perhaps to another meeting at some stage, express your views on Save Our Southern Valley's Facebook page, and let's see if we can work towards an upwelling of community involvement, because what we've heard here tonight is sufficiently concerning enough to deserve that. In semi-conclusion, I'd like to apologise for my eyes. Looks like I've been up to festa, just in case. I had to have some operations on my eyelids because I could hardly open my blessed eyes and I was getting headaches. But that's all over now. So, just before we go, I would like everybody to give a round of applause to our 3 councillors.
I just wanted to let everybody know that Gecko will be involved with this, but we don't want to be the lead agency in terms of a community group, because we've got more than enough to handle with issues the whole length of the Gold Coast, but certainly we would contribute to such a committee.
One final guess.
Are we able to ask the councillors what way the council are leaning on this application?
I think that's premature. It's too early. It's too early. The councillors or the council staff?
The people that make decisions.
I think I know the answer you're going to get. Please go ahead.
At this stage, we don't have an opinion one way or the other. It's
well, we've all got an opinion because we know it's wrong. This is a rural area. Yeah. You shouldn't even be considering an application like this in this rural area. Surely you must have a thought.
I think the job that the council staff have to do is to read the 900 pages of the report first, as we have to do. This is a preliminary meeting to just gauge the sentiment. Your sentiment is well expressed, and I think that it's probably a bit unfair to to have our guests be required to comment on that. Now, I'm going to...
And can I say that I've got the same concerns that all of you have expressed tonight about this ballot.
That's lovely, thank you.
So, one final...
I think we should try a little bit harder to get a steering group together. And I know Sam Stewart's here. Sam was on the committee with the Boral. They did a brilliant job, absolutely fantastic job. And surely there's an ability to build on some of that terrific work that the people who prevented the quarry achieved.
Don and Megan and I are going to be up here after, and anybody who would like to come up and express an interest in loosely forming a group, I would like to once again thank the councillors and thank the council staff, and also thank the observers from MLA Jan Stuckey, Member for Grumman's office. Thank you so much.